Hello class, and welcome to our brief presentation, Introduction to Animal Rights. So in this presentation, we are going to engage in an overview. We will learn some of the key language and some of the key issues involved in the animal rights debate. Then we'll talk about the secular issue of human rights, and we'll review some major questions that we will consider throughout this unit. So you all know how these presentations work. I like to begin with some very fundamental definitions so we're on the same page. So before we can even talk about animal rights, what do we mean by an animal? Well, an animal is a living organism belonging to the kingdom Animalia, typically characterized by a multicellular body, specialized sense organs, voluntary movement, responses to factors in the environment, and the ability to acquire and digest food. So put succinctly, an animal is, first of all, multicellular. So we're not talking about an amoeba or a paramecia, so like a single-celled organism would not be considered an animal. An animal is a sentient being, meaning that it has sense organs that allows for it to sense and react to the environment around it. It is capable of voluntary movement, so a rock would not be considered an animal because it cannot move voluntarily. And that an animal is distinct from human beings in one way or another, usually through some kind of superior ability for moral reasoning and things of that nature. So again, when you think of an animal, think of a multicellular sentient being that is capable of voluntary movement and is somehow distinct from human beings. Now, some questions for us to consider in the realm of environmental ethics and animal rights are the following. Do animals have personhood or moral status? Personhood is basically a fancy philosophical term for whether something has moral rights or not. So do animals have moral rights? If they do animals have equal moral status to human beings? Or are the rights of animals the same as humans or different? So on this question of personhood, we have three different schools of thought. We have the opinions of indirect theorists, direct but unequal theorists, and direct and equal theorists. So according to indirect theorists, do animals have personhood? That is, do they have moral status or moral rights? No. Why? Because animals lack moral reasoning and autonomy. So for indirect theorists, a person is something or someone that has the ability of moral reasoning and has some kind of freedom in their behavior. Animals are considered to not have moral reasoning, and they are governed by instinct, so they have no free will. As a result, indirect theorists argue that animals do not have moral status and thus are without moral rights because they are not persons. Now, direct but unequal theorists argue, yes, animals do have personhood. Why? Because animals are sentient. That is, because animals have the ability to sense pain and pleasure, because they have the ability to be aware of the environment and react to it, direct but unequal theorists argue that animals are therefore persons. And because animals are persons, they have moral status. But that status is not equal to that of human beings. So for direct but unequal theorists, if I were to kill an animal, then the punishment would not be quite as great as if I killed a human being, because human beings have greater moral status than animals do, because they have, one could argue, greater awareness or greater sentience than animals do. And then we have direct and equal theorists who say, yes, animals do have personhood. Why? Because animals are sentient, subject to the pain-pleasure principle, just as direct but unequal theorists argue. But the direct and equal theorists further argue that all sentient beings have the same moral status, that is, you cannot discriminate based on moral reasoning and autonomy. So in other words, direct and equal theorists say, yes, animals do have personhood because they have sentience. And because of that, they are equal to human beings. Human beings are sentient, animals are sentient, therefore they are both persons and therefore have equal rights. So as we're approaching our religious traditions, yeah, just keep in mind, where these religious traditions fall within this debate. Are our religious traditions more on the side of indirect theories, direct but unequal, or direct and equal theories? So let us assume for a moment that animals do have some kind of moral status. If that is the case, according to environmentalists, why should we as human beings protect and conserve animals? That is, what are the anthrocentric or human-centric reasons? What are the biocentric reasons? What are the theocentric reasons? Now, of course, you'll notice that there are blanks next to these. That is, I want you to think about this. So again, what would be some anthrocentric, biocentric, and theocentric reasons? Now, speaking of questions, here are 3 major questions that I would like for us to think about in this unit. 1, do our religious traditions contain any teachings on animal rights? Secondly, if they do they use anthrocentric, biocentric, or theocentric reasoning? And what do our religions teach about the human-animal relationship? Are animals equal to human beings? Are human beings permitted to eat animals or slaughter them? Are there any laws concerning how human beings can consume or slaughter animals? So again, do religions have any concern whatsoever for animals? And if so, what is the nature of that concern? So that is something that we are going to investigate this week.